Welcome back to A Clock in the Journal. The night is alive. 2. Alive. Voices rise. Movement everywhere. A perfect cover until it isn't. Because chaos does not obey. It spreads. It shifts. And once it begins, it does not stop where you expect. He moves through it. Calm. Controlled. But even control has its limits. A single moment breaks, and everything follows. Because when the world around you loses its shape, so does the plan within it. Chapter 12. A Midsummer Nights. Work. The dense and total darkness was broken in one place, and one only, by a plateful of light proceeding from a tiny bulb of incandescence in its center. This blinding atom of white heat lit up a hand hardly moving, a pen continually poised over a disk of snowy paper, and on the other side something that lay handy on the table, reflecting the light in its plated parts. It was Raffles at his latest deviltry. He had not heard me, and he could not see, but for that matter he never looked up from his task. Sometimes his face bent over it, and I could watch its absolute concentration. The brow was furrowed, and the mouth pursed, yet there was a hint of the same quiet and wary smile with which Raffles would bowl an over or drill holes in a door. I stood for some moments fascinated, entranced, before creeping in to warn him of my presence in a whisper, but this time he heard my step, snatched up electric torch and glittering revolver, and covered me with the one in the other's light. "CITJ!" I gasped. "Bunny!" he exclaimed in equal amazement and displeasure. "What the devil do you mean by this?" "You're in danger," I whispered. "I came to warn you." "Danger? I'm never out of it." "But how did you know where to find me? And how on God's earth did you get here?" "I'll tell you some other time. You know those two brutes you dodged the other day?" "I ought to. They're waiting below for you at this very moment." Raffles peered a few moments through the handful of white light between our faces. "Let them wait," said he, and replaced the torch upon the table and put down his revolver for his pen. "They're detectives," I urged. "Are they, Bunny? What else could they be?" "What indeed?" murmured Raffles, as he fell to work again with bent head and deliberate pen. "You gave them the slip on Friday, but they must have known your game and lain in wait for you here, one or other of them, ever since. It's my belief Dan Levy put them up to it, and the yarn about the letter was just to tempt you into this trap and get you caught in the act. He didn't want to copy one bit. For God's sake, don't stop to finish it now." "I don't agree with you," said Raffles without looking up, "and I don't do things by halves. Your precious detectives must have patience, Bunny, and so must you." He held his watch to the bulb. "In about 20 minutes there'll be real danger, but we couldn't be safer in our beds for the next 10. So perhaps you'll let me finish without further interruption. Or else, get out by yourself as you came in." I turned away from Raffles and his light, and blundered back to the landing. The blood boiled in my veins. Here had I fought and groped my way to his side, through difficulties it might have taxed even him to surmount, as one man swims ashore with a rope from the wreck, at the same mortal risk, with the same humane purpose. And not a word of thanks, not one syllable of congratulation, but, "Get out by yourself as you came in." I had more than half a mind to get out, and for good. Nay, as I stood and listened on the landing, I could have found it in my outraged heart to welcome those very sleuth-hounds from the square, with a cordon of police behind them. Yet my boiling blood ran cold when warm breath smote my cheek, and a hand my shoulder at one in the same awful moment. "Raffles!" I cried in a strangled voice. "Hush, Bunny!" he chuckled in my ear. "Didn't you know who it was?" "I never heard you. Why did you steal on me like that?" "You see, you're not the only one who can do it, Bunny." "I own it would have served me right if you'd brought the square about our ears." "Have you finished in there?" I asked gruffly. "Rather." "Then you'd better hurry up and put everything as you found it." "It's all done, Bunny. Red tape tied on such a perfect forgery that the crux will be to prove it is one, safe locked up, and every paper in its place. I never heard a sound." "I never made one," said Raffles, leading me upstairs by the arm. "You see how you put me on my mettle, Bunny, old boy?" I said no more till we reached the self-contained flat at the top of the house. Then I begged Raffles to be quiet in a lower whisper than his own. "Why, Bunny? Do you think there are people inside?" "Aren't there?" I cried aloud in my relief. "You flatter me, Bunny," laughed Raffles as we groped our way in. "This is where they keep their John Bulldog, a magnificent figure of a commissionaire with the VC itself on his manly bosom. Catch me come when he was at home. One of us would have had to die, and it would have been a shame either way. Poor pussy then. Poor puss." We had reached the kitchen, and the cat was rubbing itself against Raffles's legs. "But how on earth did you get rid of him for the night?" "Made friends with him when I called on Friday. Didn't I tell you I had an appointment with the bloated head of this notorious firm when I cleared out of Lord's? I'm about to strengthen his already unrivaled list of clients. You shall hear all about that later. We had another interview this afternoon, when I asked my VC if he ever went to the theater. You see, he had spotted Tom Fool and told me he never had a chance of getting to Lord's. So I got him tickets for Rosemary instead, but of course I swore they had just been given to me and I couldn't use them. You should have seen how the hero beamed. So that's where he is. He and his wife, or was, until the curtain went down. Good Lord, Raffles, is the piece over? Nearly 10 minutes ago, but it'll take 'em all that unless they come home in a cab." And Raffles had been sitting before the fire on the kitchen table, encouraging the cat when this formidable VC and his wife must be coming every instant nearer Gray's Inn Square. Why, my dear Bunny, I should back myself to swarm up and out without making a sound or leaving a sign if I heard our hero's key in the lock this moment. After you, Bunny. I climbed up with trembling knees, Raffles holding the rope taut to make it easier. Once more I stood upright under the stars and the telephone wires and leaned against a chimney stack to wait for Raffles. But before I saw him, before I even heard his unnecessarily noiseless movements, I heard something else that sent a chill all through me. It was not the sound of a key in the lock. It was something far worse than that. It was the sound of voices on the roof, and of footsteps drawing nearer through the very next valley of leads and tiles. I was crouching on the leads outside the dormer window as Raffles climbed into sight within. "They're after us up here," I whispered in his face. "On the next roof! I hear them!" Up came Raffles with his hands upon the sill, then with his knees between his hands, and so out on all fours into the narrow rivulet of lead between the sloping tiles. Out of the opposite slope, a yard or two on, rose a stout stack of masonry, a many-headed monster with a chimney pot on each, and a full supply of wires for whiskers. Behind this gorgon of the housetops, Raffles hustled me without a word, and himself took shelter as the muffled voices on the next roof grew more distinct. They were the voices that I had overheard already in the square, the voices but not the tones. The tones, the words, were those of an enemy divided against itself. "And now we've gone and come too far," grumbled the one who had been last to arrive upon the scene below. "We did that," the other muttered. "The moment we came in after 'em, we should have stopped where we were." "With that other cove driving up and going in without ever showing a glim?" Raffles nudged me, and I saw what I had done. But the weakling of the pair still defended the position he had reluctantly abandoned on terra firma. He was all for returning while there was time, and there were fragments of the broken argument that were beginning to puzzle me when a soft oath from the man in front proclaimed the discovery of the open window and the rope. "We got 'em," he whispered stagily, "like rats in a trap. You forget what it is we've got to get." "Well, we must first catch our man, mustn't we? And how do you know his pal hasn't gone in to warn him where we were?" "If he has, and we'd stopped there, they'd do us easy." "They may do us easier down there in the dark," replied the other, with a palpable shiver. "They'll hear us and lie in wait. In the dark, we shan't have a dog's chance." "All right, you get out of it and save your skin. I'd rather work alone than with a blessed funk." The situation was identical with many a one in the past between Raffles and me. The poor brute in my part resented the charge against his courage as warmly as I had always done. He was merely for the better part of valor, and how right he was Raffles and I only knew. I hoped the lesson was not lost upon Raffles. Dialogue and action alike resembled one of our own performances far more than ordinary police methods as we knew them. We heard the squeeze of the leader's clothes and the rattle of his buttons over the window ledge. "It's like old times," we heard him mutter, and before many moments the weakling was impulsively whispering down to know if he should follow. I felt for that fellow at every stage of his unwilling proceedings. I was to feel for him still more. Raffles had stepped down like a cat from behind our cover. Grasping an angle of the stack with either hand, I put my head round after him. The wretched player of my old part was on his haunches at the window, stooping forward, more in than out. I saw Raffles grinning in the starlight, saw his foot poised, and the other poor devil disappear. Then a dull bump, then a double crash, and such a cursing as left no doubt that the second fellow had fallen plumb on top of the first. Also from his language I fancied he would survive the fall, but Raffles took no peep at his handiwork. Hardly had the rope whipped out at my feet than he had untied the other end. "Like lamplighters, Bunny." And back we went, helter-skelter along the valleys of lead and over the hills of tile. The noise in the kitchen died away as we put a roof or two between us and that of Burroughs and Burroughs. "This is where I came out," I called to Raffles as he passed the place. "There's a ladder here where I left it in the loft." "No time for ladders," cried Raffles over his shoulder, and not for some moments did he stop in his stride. Nor was it I who stopped him then. It was a sudden hubbub somewhere behind us, somewhere below, the blowing of a police whistle and the sound of many footsteps in the square. "That's for us," I gasped. "The ladder! The ladder!" "Ladder be damned," returned Raffles roughly. "It isn't for us at all. It's my pal the VC who has come home and bottled the other blighters. Thinking they're thieves? Thinking any rot you like. Our course is over the rest of the roofs on this side, over the whole lot at the top end, and if possible, down the last staircase in the corner. Then we only have to show ourselves in the square for a tick before we're out by way of Verulam buildings. Is there another gate there?" I asked, as he scampered on with me after him. "Yes, but it's closed and the porter leaves at 12, and it must be jolly near that now. Wait, Bunny, someone or other is sure to be looking out of the top windows across the square. They'll see us if we take our fences too freely." We had come to one of the transverse tile slopes, which hitherto we had run boldly up and down in our helpful and noiseless rubber soles. Now, not to show ourselves against the stars, to a stray pair of eyes on some other high level, we crept up on all fours and rolled over at full length. It added considerably to our time over more than a whole side of the square. Meanwhile, the police whistles had stopped, but the company in the square had swollen audibly. It seemed an age, but I suppose it was not many minutes before we came to the last of the dormer windows, looking into the last veil of tiles in the northeast angle of the square. Something gleamed in the starlight. There was a sharp little sound of splitting wood, and Raffles led me on hands and knees into just such a loft as I had entered before by ladder. His electric torch discovered the trap door at a gleam. Raffles opened it and let down the rope, only to whisk it up again so smartly that it struck my face like a whiplash. A door had opened on the top landing. We listened over the open trap door, and knew that another stood listening on the invisible threshold underneath. Then we saw him running downstairs, and my heart leapt, for he never once looked up. I can see him still, foreshortened by our bird's-eye view into a Turkish fez and a fringe of white hair and red neck, a billow of dressing gown, and bare heels peeping out of bedroom slippers at every step that we could follow, but no face all the way down, because he was a bent old boy who never looked like looking up. Raffles threw his rope aside, gave me his hand instead, and dropped me on the landing like a feather, dropping after me without a moment's pause. In fact, the old fellow with the fez could hardly have completed his descent of the stairs when we began ours. Yet through the landing window we saw him charging diagonally across the square, shouting and gesticulating in his flight to the gathering crowd near the far corner. "He spotted us, Bunny," exclaimed Raffles, after listening an instant in the entrance. "Stick to me like my shadow, and do every blessed thing I do." Out he dived, I after him, and round to the left with the speed of lightning, but apparently not without the lightning's attribute of attracting attention to itself. There was a hullabaloo across the square behind us, and I looked round to see the crowd there breaking in our direction as I rushed after Raffles under an arch and up the alley in front of Verulam Buildings. It was striking midnight as we made our sprint along this alley, and at the far end the porter was preparing to depart, but he waited to let us through the gate into Gray's Inn Road, and not until he had done so can the hounds have entered the straight. We did not hear them till the gate had clanged behind us, nor had it opened again before we were high and dry in a hansom. "King's Cross!" roared Raffles for all the street to hear, but before we reached Clerkenwell Road he said he meant Waterloo, and round we went to the right along the tram lines. I was too breathless to ask questions, and Raffles offered no explanations until he had lit a Sullivan. "That little bit of wrong way may lose us our train," he said as he puffed the first cloud. "But it'll shoot the whole field to King's Cross as sure as scent is scent, and if we do catch our train, Bunny, we shall have it to ourselves as far as this pack is concerned. Hurrah! Blackfriars Bridge and a good 5 minutes to go. You're going straight down to Levy's with the letter?" "Yes, that's why I wanted you to meet me under the clock at 12. "But why in tennis shoes?" I asked, recalling the injunctions in his note, and the meaning that I had naturally read into them. "I thought we might possibly finish the night on the river," replied Raffles darkly. "I think so still." "And I thought you meant me to lend you a hand in Gray's Inn," Raffles laughed. "The less you think, my dear old Bunny, the better it always is. Tonight, for example, you have performed prodigies on my account. Your unselfish audacity has only been equaled by your resource. But, my dear fellow, it was a sadly unnecessary effort. Unnecessary to tell you those brutes were waiting for you down below?" "Quite, Bunny. I saw one of them and let him see me. I knew he'd send off for his pal." "Then I don't understand your tactics or theirs. Mine were to walk out the very way we did, you and I. They would never have seen me from the opposite corner of the square, or dreamt of going in after me if they hadn't spotted your getting in before them to put me on my guard. The place would have been left exactly as I found it, and those two numbskulls as much in the lurch as I left them last week outside the Albany." "Perhaps they were beginning to fear that," said I, "and meant ferreting for you in any case if you didn't show up." "Not they," said Raffles. "One of them was against it as it was. It wasn't their job at all. Not to take you in the act if they could. No, their job was to take the letter from me as soon as I got back to Earth. That was all. I happen to know. Those were their instructions from old Levy." "Levy! Did it never occur to you that I was being dogged by his creatures?" "His creatures, Raffles?" "He set them to shadow me from the hour of our interview on Saturday morning. Their instructions were to bag the letter from me as soon as I got it, but to let me go free to the devil. How can you know, AJ?" "My dear Bunny, where do you suppose I've been spending the weekend? Did you think I'd go in with a sly dog like old Shylock without watching him and finding out his real game? I should have thought it hardly necessary to tell you I've been down the river all the time." "Down the river," added Raffles, chuckling, "in a Canadian canoe and a torpedo beard. I was cruising near the foot of the old brute's garden on Friday evening, when one of the precious pair came down to tell him they had let me slip already. I landed and heard the whole thing through the window of the room where we shall find him tonight. It was Levy who set them to watch the crib since they'd lost the cracksman. He was good enough to reiterate all his orders for my benefit. You will hear me take him through them when we get down there, so it's no use going over the same ground twice." "Funny orders for a couple of Scotland Yard detectives," was my puzzled comment as Raffles produced an inordinate cab fare. "Scotland Yard?" said he. "My good Bunny, those were no limbs of the law. They're old thieves set to catch a thief, and they've been caught themselves for their pains." Of course they were. Every detail of their appearance and their behavior confirmed the statement in the flash that brought them all before my mind. And I had never thought of it, never but dreamt, that we were doing battle with the archenemies of our class. But there was no time for further reflection, nor had I recovered breath enough for another word, when the hansom clattered up the cobbles into Waterloo Station. And our last sprint of that athletic night ended in a simultaneous leap into separate carriages as the platform slid away from the 12:10 train. Chapter 13. Knocked Out. But it was hardly likely to be the last excitement of the night. As I saw for myself before Raffles joined me at Vauxhall, an arch-traitor like Daniel Levy might at least be trusted to play the game out with loaded dice. No single sportsman could compete against his callous machinations, and that was obviously where I was coming in. I only wished I had not come in before. I saw now the harm that I had done by my rash proceedings in Gray's Inn, the extra risk entailed already, and a worse one still impending. If the wretches who had shadowed him were really Levy's mercenaries, and if they really had been taken in their own trap, their first measure of self-defense would be the denunciation of Raffles to the real police. Such at least was my idea, and Raffles himself made light enough of it. He thought they could not expose him without dragging in Levy, who had probably made it worth their while not to do that on any consideration. His magnanimity in the matter, which he flatly refused to take as seriously as I did, made it difficult for me to press old Raffles, as I otherwise might have done, for an outline of those further plans in which I hoped to atone for my blunders by being of some use to him after all. His nonchalant manner convinced me that they were cut and dried, but I was left perhaps deservedly in the dark as to the details. I merely gathered that he had brought down some document for Levy to sign in execution of the verbal agreement made between them in town. Not until that agreement was completed by his signature was the harpy to receive the precious epistle he pretended never to have written. Raffles, in fine, had the air of a man who has the game in his hands, who is none the less prepared for foul play on the other side, and by no means perturbed at the prospect. We left the train at a sweet-smelling platform, on which the lights were being extinguished as we turned into a quiet road, where bats flew over our heads between the lampposts, and a policeman was passing a disc of light over a jerry-built abuse of the name of Queen Anne. Our way led through quieter roads of larger houses standing further back, until at last we came to the enemy's gates. They were wooden gates without a lodge, yet the house set well beyond them, on the river's brim, was a mansion of considerable size and still greater peculiarity. It was really two houses, large and small, connected by a spine of white posts and joists and glimmering glass. In the more substantial building no lights were to be seen from the gates, but in the annex a large French window made a lighted square at right angles with the river and the road. We had set foot in the gravel drive, with a long line of poplars down one side, and on the other a wide lawn dotted with cedars and small shrubs, when Raffles strode among these with a smothered exclamation, and a wild figure started from the ground. "What are you doing here?" demanded Raffles, with all the righteous austerity of a law-abiding citizen. "Nutting, sir," replied an alien tongue, a gleam of good teeth in the shadow of his great soft hat. "I been see Mr. Levy in ze house on ze business, gentlemen." "Seen him, have you? Then if I were you I should make a decent departure," said Raffles, "by the gate," to which he pointed with increased severity of tone and bearing. The weird figure uncovered a shaggy head of hair, made us a grotesque bow with his right hand melodramatically buried in the folds of a voluminous cape, and stalked off in the starlight with much dignity. But we heard him running in the road before the gate had clicked behind him. "Isn't that the fellow we saw in Jermyn Street last Thursday?" I asked Raffles in a whisper. "That's the chap," he whispered back. "I wonder if he spotted us, Bunny. Levy's treated him scandalously, of course. It all came out in a torrent the other morning. I only hope he hasn't been serving Dan Levy as Jack Rudder served old Baird. I could swear that was a weapon of sorts he'd got under his cloak." And as we stood together under the stars, listening to the last of the runaway footfalls, I recalled the killing of another, and a less notorious usurer, by a man we both knew, and had even helped to shield from the consequences of his crime. Yet the memory of our terrible discovery on that occasion had not the effect of making me shrink from such another now, nor could I echo the hope of Raffles in my heart of hearts. If Dan Levy also had come to a bad end, well, it was no more than he deserved, if only for his treachery to Raffles, and at any rate, it would put a stop to our plunging from bad to worse in an adventure of which the sequel might well be worst of all. I do not say that I was wicked enough absolutely to desire the death of this sinner for our benefit, but I saw the benefit at least as plainly as the awful possibility, and it was not with unalloyed relief that I beheld a great figure stride through the lighted windows at our nearer approach. Though his back was to the light before I saw his face, and the whole man might have been hacked out of ebony, it was every inch the living Levy who stood peering in our direction, one hand hollowed at an ear, the other shading both eyes. "Is that you, boys?" he croaked in sepulchral salute. "It depends which boys you mean," replied Raffles, marching into the zone of light. "There are so many of us about tonight." Levy's arms dropped at his sides, and I heard him mutter, "Raffles," with a malediction. Next moment he was inquiring whether we had come down alone, yet peering past us into the velvet night for his answer. "I brought our friend Bunny," said Raffles, "but that's all." "Then what do you mean by saying there are so many of you about?" "I was thinking of the gentleman who was here just before us." "Here just before you? Why, I haven't seen a soul since my household went to bed, but we met the fellow just this minute within your gates. A little foreign devil with a head like a mop, and the cloak of an operatic conspirator." "That beggar!" cried Levy, flying into a high state of excitement on the spot. "That blessed little beggar on my tracks down here. I've had him thrown out of the office in Jermyn Street. He's threatened me by letter and telegram, so now he thinks he'll come and try it on in person down air. Seen me, eh? I wish I'd seen I am. I'm ready for biters like that, gentlemen. I'm not to be caught on the op down here." And a plated revolver twinkled and flashed in the electric light as Levy drew it from his hip pocket and flourished it in our faces. He would have gone prowling through the grounds with it if Raffles had not assured him that the foreign foe had fled on our arrival. As it was, the pistol was not put back in his pocket when Levy at length conducted us indoors. He placed it on an occasional table beside the glass that he drained on entering, and forthwith set his back to a fire which seemed in keeping with the advanced hour, and doubly welcome in an apartment so vast that the billiard table was a mere item at one end, and sundry trophies of travel and the chase a far more striking and unforeseen feature. "Why, that's a better grizzly than the one at Lord's," exclaimed Raffles, pausing to admire a glorious fellow near the door, while I mixed myself the drink he had declined. "Yes," said Levy. "The man that shot all this lot used to go about saying he'd shoot me at one time, but I need hardly tell you he gave it up as a bad job, and went and did what some folks call a worse instead. He didn't get much show air, I can tell you. That little foreign snipe won't either, nor yet any other carrion that think they want my blood. I'd empty this shooter mine into their innards as soon as look at 'em. I don't give a curse who they are. Just as well I wasn't brought up to your profession, eh, Raffles?" "I don't quite follow you, Mr. Levy." "Oh, yes, you do," said the moneylender with his gastric chuckle. "How've you got on with that little bit o' burgling?" And I saw him screw up his bright eyes and glance through the open windows into the outer darkness, as though there was still a hope in his mind that we had not come down alone. I formed the impression that Levy had returned by a fairly late train himself, for he was in morning dress, in dusty boots, and there was an abundant supply of sandwiches on the table with the drinks. But he seemed to have confined his own attentions to the bottle, and I like to think that the sandwiches had been cut for the two emissaries for whom he was welcome to look out for all night. "How did you get on?" he repeated when he had given them up for the present. "For a first attempt," replied Raffles without a twinkle, "I don't think I've done so badly." "Ah, I keep forgetting you're a young beginner," said Levy, catching the old note in his turn. "A beginner who's scarcely likely to go on, Mr. Levy, if all cribs are as easy to crack as that lawyer's office of yours in Gray's Inn Square." "As easy?" Raffles recollected his pose. "It was enormous fun," said he. "Of course one couldn't know that there would be no hitch. There was an exciting moment towards the end. I have to thank you for quite a new thrill of sorts. But my dear Mr. Levy, it was as easy as ringing the bell and being shown in. It only took rather longer. What about the caretaker? Asked the usurer, with a curiosity no longer to be concealed. He obliged me by taking his wife to the theater. At your expense? No, Mr. Levy. The item will be debited to you in due course. So you got in without any difficulty? Over the roof. And then I hit upon the right room. And then, Raffles, I opened the right safe. Go on, man! But the man was only going on at his own rate, and the more Levy pressed him, the greater his apparent reluctance to go on at all. Well, I found the letter all right. Oh yes, I made a copy of it. Was it a good copy? Almost too good, if you ask me. Thus Raffles under increasing pressure. Well, you left that one there, I suppose? What happened next? There was no longer any masking the moneylender's eagerness to extract the denouement of Raffles' adventure. That it required extracting must have seemed a sufficient earnest of the ultimate misadventure so craftily plotted by Levy himself. His great nose glowed with the imminence of victory. His strong lips loosened their habitual hold upon each other, and there was an impressionist daub of yellow fang between. The brilliant little eyes were reduced to sparkling pinheads of malevolent glee. This was not the fighting face I knew better and despised less. It was the living epitome of low cunning and foul play. The next thing that happened, said Raffles in his most leisurely manner, was the descent of Bunny like a bolt from the blue. Had he gone in with you? No, he came in after me as bold as blazes to say that a couple of common, low detectives were waiting for me down below in the square. That was very kind of I.M., snarled Levy, pouring a murderous fire upon my person from his little black eyes. Kind, cried Raffles. It saved the whole show. It did it? I had time to dodge the limbs of the law by getting out another way, and never letting them know that I had got out at all. Then you left them there? In their glory, said Raffles, radiant in his own. Though I must confess I could not see them at the time. There were excellent reasons for not stating there, and then the delicious plight in which we had really left Levy's myrmidons. I myself would have driven home our triumph and his treachery by throwing our winning cards upon the table and simultaneously exposing his false play, but Raffles was right, and I should have been wrong, as I was soon enough to see for myself. And you came away, I suppose, suggested the moneylender ironically, with my original letter in your pocket? Oh, no, I didn't, replied Raffles, with a reproving shake of the head. I thought not, cried Levy in a gust of exultation. I came away, said Raffles, if you'll pardon the correction, with the letter you never dreamt of writing, Mr. Levy. The Jew turned a deeper shade of yellow, but he had the wisdom and the self-control otherwise to ignore the point against him. You'd better let me see it, said he, and flung out his open hand with a gesture of authority which it took a Raffles to resist. Levy was still standing with his back to the fire, and I was at his feet in a saddlebag chair, with my yellow beaker on the table at my elbow. But Raffles remained aloof upon his legs, and he withdrew still further from the fire as he unfolded a large sheet of office paper, stamped with the notorious address in Jermyn Street, and displayed it on high like a phylactery. You may see by all means, Mr. Levy, said Raffles, with a slight but sufficient emphasis on his verb, but I'm not to touch. Is that it? I'm afraid I must ask you to look first, said Raffles, smiling. I should suggest, however, that you exercise the same caution in showing me that part of your quid pro quo which you have doubtless in readiness. The other part is in my pocket ready for you to sign, and after that, the 3 little papers can change hands simultaneously. Nothing could have excelled the firmness of this intimation except the EXG gravating delicacy with which it was conveyed. I saw Levy clench and unclench his great fists, and his canine jaw working protuberantly as he ground his teeth. But not a word escaped him, and I was admiring the monster's self-control, when of a sudden he swooped upon the table at my side, completely filled his empty glass with neat whiskey, and spluttering and blinking from an enormous gulp, made a lurch for Raffles with his drink in one hand and his plated pistol in the other. "Now I'll have a look," he hiccuped. "And a good look unless you want a lump of lead in your liver?" Raffles awaited his uncertain advance with a contemptuous smile. "You're not such a fool as all that, Mr. Levy, drunk or sober," said he. But his eye was on the waving weapon, and so was mine, and I was wondering how a man could have got so very suddenly drunk. When the nobbler of crude spirit was hurled with most sober aim, glass and all, full in the face of Raffles, and the letter plucked from his grasp and flung upon the fire, while Raffles was still reeling in his blindness, and before I had struggled to my feet. Raffles for the moment was absolutely blinded. As I say, his face was streaming with blood and whiskey, and the prince of traitors already crowing over his vile handiwork. But that was only for a moment, too. The blackguard had been fool enough to turn his back on me, and first jumping upon my chair, I sprang upon him like any leopard, and brought him down with my 10 fingers in his neck, and such a crack on the parquet with his skull as left it a dead weight on my hands. I remember the rasping of his bristles as I disengaged my fingers and let the leaden head fall back. It fell sideways now, and if it had but looked less dead, I believe I should have stamped the life out of the reptile on the spot. I know that I rose exultant from my deed,